Hi, I'm Claire, and 3 weeks ago, I spent 14 hours cooking a complete Thanksgiving feast for 12 people, while my family sat in the living room watching football and complaining about the temperature of their drinks. When I finally sat down to eat, my plate was cold, my chair was the broken one from the garage, and my sister Brooke announced she was going vegan, effective immediately. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But here's the thing that broke me. When I asked for help cleaning up, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Well, you volunteered for this." I never volunteered, I was told. And that night, as I scrubbed gravy stains off plates at midnight while everyone else slept off their turkey comas, I made a decision that would change everything. The restaurant owner who witnessed what happened next didn't just call my family, he exposed them in a way that made the evening news. The morning of Thanksgiving started the way it always did in the Thompson household. I woke up at 5:30 to the sound of my phone buzzing with a text from my mother. "Remember, Claire, everything needs to be ready by 3. Brooke's bringing her new boyfriend and his parents, so make sure the presentation is perfect. Also, Uncle Jim is diabetic now, so figure something out for dessert. No good morning, no thank you in advance. Just expectations wrapped in passive-aggressive efficiency." I rolled out of my narrow bed in the cramped studio apartment I'd been renting since moving out 8 months ago. The place wasn't much, a converted garage behind Mrs. Patterson's house, but it was mine. The walls were thin enough that I could hear her morning news through the shared wall, and the heater only worked when it felt like it. But nobody told me what to cook, when to clean, or how to arrange my furniture. After 26 years of living under my parents' roof, that freedom felt like breathing underwater for the first time. The grocery list I'd written the night before covered 2 full pages. Turkey, stuffing ingredient, cranberry sauce components, because store-bought wasn't acceptable, according to Linda Thompson's standards. Sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, green bean casserole fixings, 3 different types of bread for various dietary restrictions that had been mentioned in passing over the past month, and ingredients for 2 separate desserts, because Cousin Rachel was apparently on some elimination diet that nobody had bothered to explain to me in detail. Standing in the fluorescent lighting of the grocery store at 6:45 in the morning, I calculated the cost in my head: $230, nearly half of my monthly grocery budget, for one meal, for people who would spend the entire day criticizing the temperature, the seasoning, the timing, and probably the way I'd arranged the napkins. But this was the tradition. This was my role. This was what kept me connected to the family that had raised me to believe that love was something you earned through service. The drive to my parents' house took 23 minutes through suburban Ohio streets, lined with houses that all looked like variations of the same architectural fever dream. Maple Street sat in the heart of Riverside's most established neighborhood, where the houses had names like the Bradford and the Wellington, and came with homeowners association fees that cost more than my rent. The Thompson house was a colonial revival with hunter green shutters and a front door that my mother repainted every spring to match whatever color scheme she'd decided represented our family's aesthetic that year. I parked in the driveway behind Brooke's white BMW, noting that she'd arrived early enough to claim the good parking spot, but apparently not early enough to help with any actual preparation. Through the kitchen window I could see her sitting at the breakfast bar, perfectly styled in a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, scrolling through her phone while sipping what looked like a specialty coffee drink from the expensive machine my parents had bought her for her birthday. The side door led directly into the kitchen, a sprawling space with granite countertops and commercial-grade appliances that my mother loved to show off but rarely used herself. Brooke looked up when I entered, armed with my canvas grocery bags and the folding table I'd brought to create extra prep space. "Oh good, you're here," she said, not moving from her seat. "Mom's been stressed all morning about timing. I told her you'd handle it though. You always." She said it like a compliment, but there was something underneath it that felt like being patted on the head for performing a trick. My mother appeared from the dining room, already dressed in her Thanksgiving outfit, a burgundy blouse that she'd probably been planning for weeks, paired with black slacks and the pearl necklace that only came out for holidays and dinner parties. Her hair was styled in the same shoulder-length bob she'd worn for the past 15 years, not a strand out of place despite the fact that she'd allegedly been stressed all morning. "Claire, thank goodness. I was starting to worry you'd gotten lost. We have so much to do today." She surveyed my grocery bags with the expression of a general reviewing troops. "I hope you remembered everything. Last year the cranberry sauce was too tart and Aunt Helen mentioned it at least 3 times during dinner." I began unpacking ingredients onto the counter, organizing them by cooking time and complexity. I got everything on the list, plus extras in case we run short on anything. I'd learned years ago that running out of any component during a Thompson family gathering was treated like a war crime. Better to overbuy than to face the passive-aggressive commentary that would follow me through the entire holiday season. Wonderful. Now I've been thinking about the timeline, and I really think we should serve at 2:30 instead of 3. Roger and Patricia are coming with Brooke's James, and I want to make sure we have time for proper conversation before people get too full and tired. She said this as if I hadn't already planned the entire meal around a 3 o'clock serving time, as if the turkey I'd calculated to finish at exactly 2:45 could simply be adjusted like a thermostat. Brooke stretched dramatically from her perch at the breakfast bar. "Actually, Mom, James is running a little late. He had this amazing opportunity to network at the country club this morning. Some potential investors for his startup. You understand how important those connections are." She said it with the tone of someone who had never had to worry about making rent, never had to choose between networking and grocery money. "Of course, dear. Claire, can you adjust accordingly?" My mother didn't wait for an answer before continuing. "Also, I forgot to mention that James's parents are very particular about food presentation. Patricia mentioned that they're used to a certain level of sophistication, so let's make sure everything looks restaurant quality." I nodded, mentally recalculating cooking times, and wondering what restaurant quality meant to people who probably considered Olive Garden ethnic cuisine. "No problem. Should I plan for any other dietary restrictions I should know about?" "Well," Brooke said, examining her manicure, "I've been thinking about going vegan. Not permanently, but I've been reading about the environmental impact of turkey farming, and it's honestly really disturbing. I might just eat sides today." She announced this the way someone might mention they'd decided to try a new shampoo, as if I hadn't spent the last week brining a 22-pound turkey that now sat in the refrigerator like an accusation. As if the meal planning, the shopping, the preparation hadn't all been built around the assumption that the people I was cooking for would actually eat the food I was making. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," my mother said. "It's so important to follow your conviction." "Claire, you can work around that, can't you? There should be plenty of sides." There were plenty of sides, because I'd planned for 12 people and was cooking enough food to feed 18, but that wasn't really the point. The point was that no one had asked if I minded spending an extra 2 hours making sure there were enough vegetables and starches to constitute a complete meal for someone who'd decided to change their entire dietary philosophy on the day of the dinner. The point was that my sister had just announced a major change that affected my entire day, and everyone was looking at me to accommodate it as if flexibility was just another item on my job description. "Of course," I said, because what else was there to say? "I'll make sure there are plenty of options." My father wandered into the kitchen wearing his traditional Thanksgiving uniform, khaki slacks, a button-down shirt in what he called autumn colors, and the bemused expression of a man who had never been responsible for planning, shopping for, or cooking a holiday meal in his life. "Something smells good in here," he said, though I hadn't started cooking anything yet. "When do we eat?" 2:30, my mother said. "Claire's adjusting the timing." 2:30, I thought we said 3. "The game doesn't start until 2. He looked genuinely confused, as if the timing of our family dinner had been coordinated around his television schedule rather than the complex logistics of preparing multiple dishes in a single kitchen. "The game will still be on during dinner, Dad," Brooke said. "We can watch from the dining room. The TV's right there." "It's not the same," he muttered, but he was already retreating toward the living room where I could hear the pre-game commentary starting up. "Let me know when everything's ready," and just like that, I was alone in the kitchen with 14 hours of cooking ahead of me and a family who had scattered to their various comfortable positions throughout the house, confident that everything would magically appear on the table at exactly the right time, at exactly the right temperature, eased into everyone's individual preferences and presented with restaurant-quality sophistication. I tied my hair back, rolled up my sleeves, and got to work. The turkey went into the oven first after I'd stuffed it with the sage and onion dressing that had been my grandmother's recipe, the one my mother always claimed credit for but had never actually made herself. While it roasted, I started the cranberry sauce from scratch, simmering fresh cranberries with orange zest, and just enough sugar to balance the tartness that had apparently traumatized Aunt Helen the previous year. By 10 o'clock, the kitchen smelled like Thanksgiving. By 11, every burner on the stove was occupied, and I'd started calculating oven space like a chess master planning 12 moves ahead. The sweet potato casserole needed 45 minutes at 3:50. The green bean casserole needed 30 minutes at 3:20. The dinner rolls needed to be timed perfectly so they'd come out of the oven warm and golden just as everything else finished. Brooke drifted through occasionally, usually to refill her coffee or grab a snack, sometimes to update me on James's progress. "He's leaving the country club now," she'd say, or "he's stopping by his apartment to change," always with the implication that these updates were crucial information I needed for my planning purposes. She never offered to help, never asked if there was anything she could do, never seemed to notice that I was simultaneously managing 6 different cooking processes while she treated the kitchen like a rest stop on her way to more important activity. My mother made periodic appearances to inspect my progress and offer helpful suggestions. "Make sure the gravy isn't lumpy this year," she'd say, as if lumpy gravy was a chronic problem I struggled with rather than a one-time incident from 3 years ago, when she'd insisted I use a different flour ratio. "And remember, Uncle Jim can't have too much salt, but don't make it bland for everyone else." By noon I was moving through the kitchen like a choreographed dance, checking temperatures, stirring sauces, rotating pans, and mentally tracking 17 different timers. The turkey was browning beautifully. The stuffing was crispy on top and moist underneath. The cranberry sauce had achieved the perfect balance of sweet and tart. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. That's when Aunt Helen arrived early with cousin Rachel and her new gluten-free, dairy-free, nut-free lifestyle. "Surprise!" Aunt Helen called out as she bustled through the front door with the energy of someone who had never been responsible for accommodating last-minute dietary change. "Rachel decided to drive down from Cleveland after all. Isn't that wonderful?" Rachel appeared behind her mother looking apologetic but hopeful. "I'm so sorry, Claire. I know this is last minute. I've been having some digestive issues lately, and my doctor suggested an elimination diet. I brought my own food though, so don't worry about me." She held up a small container that looked like it might contain enough food for a child's lunch. "I just have some quinoa and steamed vegetables. I don't want to be any trouble." Looking at Rachel's sad little container while surrounded by the abundance I'd been preparing all morning, felt like being asked to explain why someone might want more than bread and water. She was family. She'd driven 3 hours to be here. The idea of watching her eat quinoa and steamed vegetables while everyone else enjoyed a feast felt fundamentally wrong. "Don't be ridiculous," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "I'll figure something out. There's plenty of food here that'll work for your diet. Are you sure?" "I really don't want to cause problems." "It's no problem at all," I lied, mentally recalculating portions and wondering if the roasted vegetables I'd planned as a side dish could be stretched into a main course if I added some rice or quinoa from my emergency pantry supply. My mother appeared to greet Helen with the kind of enthusiasm she reserved for relatives who didn't live close enough to visit regularly. "Helen, how wonderful that you could make it. And Rachel, sweetheart, you look so thin. Are you eating enough?" "She's on a special diet," Helen explained. "Very healthy, very trendy. Claire's going to accommodate it, aren't you, Claire?" It wasn't really a question. By 1 o'clock I had successfully modified my menu to include gluten-free, dairy-free, nut-free options for Rachel, while maintaining the original dishes for everyone else. This involved preparing a separate batch of stuffing using gluten-free bread, making a dairy-free version of the mashed potatoes using vegetable broth instead of cream, and checking every single ingredient label to make sure nothing contained hidden allergens. James arrived at 1:15 with his parents in tow, and I could hear Brooke introducing them in the living room with the kind of nervous energy that suggested this meeting was more important to her than she'd previously let on. Patricia's voice carried into the kitchen as she complimented the house's decor, and mentioned something about their recent trip to Tuscany. Roger spoke in the measured tones of someone accustomed to being listened to carefully. "Claire," my mother called from the living room, "could you bring out some appetizers? Something sophisticated?" Sophisticated appetizers had not been part of the original plan, but I quickly arranged some of the cranberry sauce on small spoons with a dollop of cream cheese and a sprinkle of toasted walnuts, creating what I hoped looked like something that might appear at a country club function. I carried them out on the good china plates, the ones that only emerged from the dining room cabinet for special occasions. The living room had been transformed into a showcase of Thompson family perfection. Fresh flowers that I hadn't seen earlier adorned the coffee table. The throw pillows had been arranged with mathematical precision. Everyone was seated in a carefully orchestrated tableau of multi-generational harmony, with James and his parents positioned prominently as the guests of honor. Patricia accepted an appetizer with the gracious smile of someone accustomed to being served. "How lovely. Did you make these yourself, Linda?" "Oh, Claire made them," my mother said with a dismissive wave. "She's been cooking all day. It's her hobby." As if the 14 hours of planning, shopping, and preparation I'd put into this meal was something I did for fun, rather than something I did because otherwise there wouldn't be a Thanksgiving dinner. As if cooking for 12 people with multiple dietary restrictions was a casual pastime rather than a complex logistical operation that required skill, timing, and endurance. "How wonderful," Patricia said, turning to me with polite interest. "Are you a professional No, I'm a graphic designer. The cooking is just..." I searched for words that wouldn't contradict my mother's characterization while still acknowledging the magnitude of what I was actually doing. "Something I do for the family." "She's very talented," Brooke said, which might have felt like support if it hadn't been delivered in the tone someone might use to praise a child's finger painting. "We're so lucky to have her." Lucky. As if my labor was a gift that had fallen from the sky rather than something I provided because the alternative was no Thanksgiving dinner at all. As if the hours of work, the expense, the stress of coordinating everyone's preferences and restrictions was just good fortune rather than a conscious choice I made to prioritize their comfort over my own convenience. I excused myself back to the kitchen where the timer for the sweet potato casserole was beeping, and the turkey needed basting. The kitchen felt like a sanctuary compared to the performance happening in the living room, even though every surface was covered with dirty dishes, ingredient containers, and the organized chaos of a meal in progress. By 2 o'clock, everything was nearly ready. The turkey was resting, golden brown and perfectly cooked. The side dishes were warming in the oven, timed to finish simultaneously. The gravy was smooth and rich, seasoned exactly to my mother's specifications. The dinner rolls were rising for their final bake. I had successfully created a restaurant-quality Thanksgiving feast for 12 people with accommodations for various dietary restrictions, all while maintaining the timeline my mother had adjusted at the last minute. That's when she appeared in the kitchen with a concerned expression. "Claire, honey, I hate to ask this, but would it be possible to hold everything for another 30 minutes? James got a very important phone call about his startup, and it would be rude to interrupt. You understand how crucial these business opportunities are." I stared at her, spatula in hand, surrounded by perfectly timed dishes that were designed to be served immediately. Holding everything for 30 minutes meant the turkey would dry out, the vegetables would overcook, the rolls would the carefully orchestrated symphony of temperatures and textures that I'd been conducting all day would collapse into a lukewarm mess. "Mom, everything is ready now. It's all timed to be served together. If we wait 30 minutes, I'm sure you can figure something out," she said with the confidence of someone who had never tried to keep multiple dishes at serving temperature without overcooking them. "You always do, and this call really is important for James's future. For Brooke's future." She said it as if James's business call was more important than the 12 hours of work I'd put into creating this meal, as if Brooke's relationship was more valuable than the food that would be ruined by waiting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As if my effort, my time, my expertise was something that could be adjusted indefinitely to accommodate everyone else's priorities. 30 minutes, I repeated. Maybe 45. Just to be safe. Better to wait a little longer than to rush them. 45 minutes. I calculated what that would mean for each dish, what salvage operations I could perform, what could be reheated and what would be irreversibly damaged. Most of it could be saved, but it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the restaurant quality presentation that Patricia expected. It wouldn't be the perfect meal I'd been working toward all day. Okay, I said, because what else was there to say? I'll figure it out. She smiled with relief and disappeared back toward the living room, leaving me alone with 14 hours of work that was about to be compromised for the sake of a phone call that couldn't be rescheduled or taken in private. I turned off the ovens, covered everything with foil, and started calculating how to salvage Thanksgiving dinner while James discussed profit margins with someone who probably wasn't even planning to eat turkey that day. At 2:45, James finally finished his call. At 3:15, we finally sat down to eat. By then, the turkey was dry, the vegetables were mushy, and the rolls had deflated into dense, disappointing lumps. But everyone gathered around the dining room table with expressions of grateful anticipation, ready to enjoy the feast that had been carefully timed for a schedule that no longer existed. "This looks wonderful, Claire," Patricia said as she accepted a plate that bore little resemblance to the restaurant quality presentation I'd originally planned. "You've clearly put a lot of work into this." "She's amazing," Brooke agreed, settling into her chair with the satisfied smile of someone whose boyfriend's business call had taken priority over everyone else's dinner. "We don't know what we'd do without her." I took my seat at the far end of the table, in the chair that wobbled because one leg was shorter than the others, the chair that had been designated as mine because it was the one nobody else wanted. My plate was already cool by the time I'd finished serving everyone else, my portion smaller because I'd given the best pieces to the guests, my Thanksgiving dinner eaten in silence while everyone else discussed James's promising business prospects and Brooke's exciting plans for their future together. When it came time to clean up, the men retreated to the living room to watch football. The women scattered to various conversations throughout the house. And I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of a 14-hour cooking marathon, washing dishes that no one else had offered to touch. That's when I started smiling. The smile started small, just a twitch at the corner of my mouth as I scraped congealed gravy from the good china plates. It grew wider as I listened to the sounds of contentment drifting from the living room, satisfied the clink of glasses being refilled with wine I'd bought but wouldn't get to enjoy. The comfortable murmur of people settling into their post-meal stupor while someone else handled the aftermath. By the time I was elbow-deep in sudsy water scrubbing the roasting pan that would take 20 minutes and significant elbow grease to clean properly, I was grinning like I'd discovered some cosmic joke that no one else was in on. Because I had, the joke was on me, and I was finally getting it. I was 26 years old, a college graduate with a successful freelance business, washing dishes alone in my parents' kitchen at 9 o'clock on Thanksgiving night while 12 people digested the meal I'd spent my entire day creating for them. I'd accommodated dietary restrictions announced minutes before serving time. I'd adjusted schedules to suit business calls. I'd transformed my carefully planned menu into something that would work for everyone except the person who'd actually cooked it, and not one person had offered to help clean up. The revelation wasn't angry or bitter. It was crystalline and liberating. This was a choice I'd been making over and over for years. I'd been volunteering for my own martyrdom, signing up to be the family's designated servant, and calling it love. But love was supposed to be reciprocal. Love was supposed to include basic consideration, minimal gratitude, the occasional offer to wash a dish or pack up leftovers. "Claire," my mother's voice floated in from the dining room, "could you wrap up some leftovers for James's parents to take home?" Patricia mentioned they loved the cranberry sauce. I paused, my hands still submerged in dishwater, and called back, "In a minute, Mom. Almost finished here. And make sure you pack some of everything," Brooke added. They're used to really high-quality food, so it's actually a huge compliment that they enjoyed it. High-quality food. As if the meal I'd prepared from scratch using premium ingredients and 14 hours of labor might not naturally qualify as high quality. As if their enjoyment was validation I should be grateful for rather than the basic expectation when someone spends an entire day cooking for you. I finished the roasting pan and moved on to the mountain of serving dishes, each one requiring individual attention to remove the baked-on residue of various casseroles and sides. The stuffing dish needed soaking. The cranberry sauce pot required careful scraping to avoid scratching the stainless steel. The gravy boat had to be cleaned with a bottle brush to reach the narrow spout. "Claire," my father called from the living room, "do you know where the coffee filters?" Patricia asked for decaf, and your mother can't find them. "Top shelf of the pantry behind the sugar," I called back, not pausing in my systematic cleaning of each dish. "There's decaf in the freezer." 20 minutes later, the kitchen was beginning to look like something other than a war zone. I'd loaded the dishwasher with what would fit, hand-washed everything else, wiped down the counters, and started putting ingredients back where they belong. The turkey carcass sat on the counter, picked clean but still substantial enough to make soup for the rest of the week. If I wanted to spend another few hours making soup that no one else would help prepare or eat. "Oh good, you're almost done," my mother said, appearing in the doorway with an empty wine glass. "I told Patricia you'd pack up those leftovers. She's raving about your cooking to everyone." "That's nice," I said, pulling containers from the cabinet and beginning the process of dividing up the food I'd prepared. Turkey for James's parents, the good cranberry sauce, a generous portion of the stuffing they'd complimented, some of the green bean casserole that had somehow survived the 45-minute delay without becoming completely overcooked. "Make sure you give them plenty," my mother continued, "and pack something for Helen and Rachel too. Rachel was so grateful that you accommodated her diet. You really saved the day with that." Saved the day. As if accommodating Rachel's last-minute dietary restrictions had been a heroic rescue mission rather than just another expectation placed on me without consultation or appreciation. As if the extra 2 hours of cooking time and additional expense of specialty ingredients was just part of my natural function in the family ecosystem. I packed containers methodically, making sure each guest family had a generous selection of everything they'd enjoy. By the time I finished, there was barely enough left for my own meals for the rest of the weekend. But that wasn't the point anymore. The point was that I was documenting this evening with perfect clarity, cataloging every request, every assumption, every moment where my labor was treated as an inexhaustible resource that required no maintenance or consideration. "Don't forget to give them the good containers," my mother added. Not the ones with the stained lids. The good containers. The ones I'd have to remember to ask for, track down over the next few weeks, hope weren't accidentally thrown away or forgotten in someone's refrigerator. Another layer of invisible labor that extended the evening's work into the indefinite future. By 10:30, the guests had departed with their carefully packed leftovers, expressing elaborate gratitude for the wonderful meal and promising to stay in touch. Aunt Helen hugged me extra tight and whispered, "You outdid yourself, sweetheart. That was restaurant-quality food." Rachel thanked me 3 separate times for accommodating her diet. Genuinely moved by the gesture, James's parents shook my hand formally and told my mother what a treasure I was. How lucky the family was to have someone so talented and generous. Patricia made a point of telling me that the cranberry sauce was better than anything she'd had at the country club, which I supposed was meant to be the highest praise she could offer. And then they were gone, and the house settled into the quiet aftermath of a successful gathering. My parents retreated to their bedroom to decompress from the stress of hosting. Brooke disappeared to James's apartment for what she described as quality time after such a long day with family. I was left alone in the kitchen that I'd been cleaning for the past 2 hours, surrounded by the evidence of my day's work and the growing clarity of what it all meant. The turkey carcass stared at me from the counter like an accusation. 14 hours of work, $230 in groceries, accommodations for 3 different dietary restrictions, schedule adjustments for business calls, perfect timing destroyed and salvaged as best I could manage. Not one offer of help, not one moment where someone else took responsibility for any aspect of the meal or its aftermath. I wrapped the carcass in plastic and stored it in the refrigerator for the soup I probably wouldn't make, turned off the lights and drove home to my converted garage apartment with a container of lukewarm leftovers that represented my entire compensation for the day's effort. That night, I sat on my narrow bed with my laptop open, researching something I'd never thought to investigate before: the actual cost of catering a Thanksgiving dinner for 12 people. Giuseppe's Italian Kitchen, the family restaurant I passed every day on my way to work, offered holiday catering services. Their Thanksgiving package for 12 people cost $850, not including gratuity, and required 48 hours notice for dietary accommodation. $850 for what I'd provided for the cost of groceries and 14 hours of unpaid labor. I clicked through their menu, reading descriptions of dishes that sounded remarkably similar to what I'd prepared. Traditional roasted turkey with sage stuffing, house-made cranberry sauce with orange zest, roasted seasonal vegetables, garlic mashed potatoes, fresh dinner rolls. Even their dietary accommodation options matched what I'd improvised for Rachel's restrictions. Giuseppe's had been in business for 32 years. They had a reputation for quality that extended throughout Riverside and the surrounding counties. People made reservations weeks in advance for their holiday catering, paid premium prices for food that was supposedly worth the expense because it was prepared by professionals who understood the value of their expertise and labor. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my small apartment, processing the numbers. $850 for food preparation, probably another $200 for service and cleanup, based on the catering websites I'd browsed. Over $1,000 worth of professional services, provided by me for free, with a smile, because that's what family did for each other. Except it wasn't what family did for each other, it was what I did for them. It was a one-way transaction disguised as tradition, a systematic exploitation disguised as love. I thought about the way Patricia had complimented the cranberry sauce, comparing it favorably to country club food. I thought about my mother describing my cooking as a hobby, something I did for fun rather than skilled labor that required compensation or even basic acknowledgement. I thought about Brooke calling me talented and generous while never offering to help with anything beyond moral support delivered from her comfortable position as a spectator. The next morning, I woke up with a decision crystallizing in my mind like ice forming on a window. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was clear. I understood the dynamic now, could see it with perfect objectivity, and that understanding gave me power I'd never recognized before. I spent the weekend developing what I came to think of as the plan. It wasn't revenge. Exactly, it was education. It was a carefully designed experiment to test my hypothesis about how my family valued my contributions when those contributions weren't automatically available. The plan started with a simple decision. I would not be cooking Christmas dinner. This wasn't a protest or a punishment. It was market research. If my family valued my cooking enough to expect it, request it, and depend on it for their holiday celebrations, then presumably they'd be willing to pay market rates for it when it was no longer available for free. If they weren't willing to pay market rates, then I'd know exactly how much my labor was actually worth to them. I spent Monday morning creating a professional-looking estimate using the design skills that actually paid my bill. I researched Giuseppe's prices, compared them with other local catering options, and calculated what it would cost to hire a professional to provide the same services I'd been providing for free. Christmas dinner for 12 people, including accommodation for dietary restrictions, service, and cleanup. $1,200. I added a family discount that brought the total down to $800, substantially less than they'd pay any professional catering service, but enough to cover my actual costs and compensate me fairly for the skilled labor involved. The estimate was professional, detailed, and reasonable. It included options for different menu packages, clear pricing for additional services, and payment terms that were standard in the industry. At the bottom I added a note: "Thank you for considering Claire Thompson Catering Services for your holiday needs. I look forward to continuing to provide high-quality meals for our family celebrations." Tuesday morning, I drove to my parents' house and presented the estimate to my mother over coffee, exactly the way I'd present any business proposal to any potential client. She stared at the document for a long time, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked almost like offense. "Claire, honey, what is this?" "It's an estimate for Christmas dinner," I said calmly. I realized that I've been providing professional-level catering services for family events, without treating it like the business transaction it actually is. "This makes everything clear and fair for everyone, but you always cook Christmas dinner, it's tradition. And I'm happy to continue doing it. This just makes sure everyone understands the value of what's involved and compensates me fairly for the time and expertise required. She set the estimate down on the kitchen table like it might contaminate her coffee. Sweetheart, we're family. Family doesn't charge family for Christmas dinner. Family also doesn't usually expect one person to provide $1,200 worth of professional services for free. I replied, but if you'd prefer to handle Christmas dinner differently this year, that's completely fine. Giuseppe's has excellent holiday catering, and I'd be happy to help coordinate with them instead. The conversation that followed was illuminating. My mother explained that asking family members to pay for family dinners was inappropriate, hurtful, and contrary to the spirit of the holiday. She suggested that I was being selfish, ungrateful, and materialistic. She reminded me of all the things the family had done for me over the years, paying for my education, providing a home until I was ready to move out, supporting my career choices even when they worried about my financial stability. None of these contributions, of course, had been presented as business transactions at the time. None had come with invoices or payment plans or expectations of reciprocal compensation. They'd been gifts, freely given, because that's what families did for each other. But somehow my contributions were different. My labor was expected rather than appreciated, ongoing rather than reciprocal, and discussing its actual value was inappropriate and offensive. I understand your perspective, I told her, but I've decided that I won't be providing unpaid catering services anymore. If you'd like me to cook Christmas dinner, the estimate covers my costs, and a reasonable fee for my time. If you'd prefer to make other arrangements, I completely support that decision and I'll be happy to attend as a guest. She asked if I was punishing the family for something. I explained that I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply treating my professional skills like professional skills instead of like a hobby I performed for free. She asked if I was having financial problems that required me to charge family members for holiday meals. I explained that my finances were fine, but that didn't mean I should provide free labor indefinitely just because I could afford to. The conversation ended with my mother saying she'd discuss it with my father and get back to me. I left the estimate on the kitchen table and drove home, feeling lighter than I had in years. That evening, Brooke called. Mom told me about your little business proposal, she said without preamble. I have to say, Claire, this is pretty shocking behavior, even for you, even for me. You know what I mean. You've always been a little intense about things, but charging family for Christmas dinner, that's a new low. I settled into my chair, phone balanced against my shoulder, and opened my laptop to review the catering research I'd been compiling. What did you think I should charge? Nothing. You should charge nothing because it's Christmas and we're family and normal people don't invoice their relatives for holiday meals. Normal people also don't expect their relatives to provide $1,200 worth of professional services for free, I said, but if you think my estimate is too high, I'm open to negotiation. What do you think would be fair compensation for 14 hours of skilled labor, plus ingredients and accommodations for dietary restrictions? There was a long silence. Claire, you're talking about cooking. It's just cooking, like what I did for Thanksgiving was just cooking. Well, yes, you made dinner. It's not like you performed surgery or something. I pulled up Giuseppe's website and read her their Thanksgiving catering description. Traditional roasted turkey with sage stuffing, house-made cranberry sauce with orange zest, roasted seasonal vegetables, garlic mashed potatoes, fresh dinner rolls and accommodations for dietary restrictions. Giuseppe's charges $850 for exactly what I provided for Thanksgiving, not including service or cleanup. That's different. Giuseppe's is a business. Exactly. And what I provided was the same quality of service that Giuseppe's provides. The only difference is that Giuseppe's gets paid for their expertise in labor. Another long silence. So what? You're going to start charging us for everything now? Birthday cakes? Sunday dinners? Are you going to send Dad an invoice for helping him set up his computer? I'm not charging for birthday cakes or Sunday dinners or computer help, I said patiently. I'm charging for professional-level catering services that require significant time, expertise, and financial investment. If you can't see the difference between helping with a computer and spending 14 hours preparing a 12-person holiday feast, then maybe that's part of the problem. The conversation continued in circles for another 20 minutes. Brooke explained that families supported each other without keeping score. That love wasn't transactional. That I was damaging our relationships by treating family gatherings like business arrangements. I explained that expecting one person to absorb all the costs and labor for family gatherings was also transactional. Just in a way that benefited everyone except the person doing the work. Eventually, she hung up with the promise that she'd talk to our parents about this situation, and hope we could work something out that didn't involve destroying Christmas with spreadsheets and invoices. I spent the rest of the evening researching local catering options and creating a list of alternatives I could recommend if my family decided not to accept my estimate. Giuseppe's was still my top choice. Their food was excellent, their prices were reasonable, and their online reviews consistently praised their professionalism and reliability. I also spent time calculating what I'd actually saved by not providing free catering services for Thanksgiving. $230 in groceries. 14 hours at my standard freelance rate of $60 per hour. Roughly $1,070 in total value, not including the emotional labor of accommodating last-minute changes and dietary restriction. $1,070. That was a month's rent and utilities for my apartment. That was a significant contribution to my emergency fund. That was the value of the labor I'd provided for free, because I'd been taught that families didn't keep score, even when the score was heavily tilted in everyone else's favor. Wednesday brought a phone call from my father. "Claire, your mother is very upset about this catering thing. I think there might be some misunderstanding here." "What kind of misunderstanding?" "Well, she seems to think you want us to pay you to cook Christmas dinner. That can't be right." I explained the estimate, the reasoning behind it, and the alternatives I'd researched. He listened with the patience of someone accustomed to managing family disputes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific costs or services. "I see," he said when I finished. "So this is about money. It's about fairness," I corrected, "and recognition of value. If you hired any professional catering service to provide what I've been providing, you'd pay market rates without question. The only reason my services have been free is because I'm family, which means my time and expertise are somehow worth less than a stranger. But that's how families work, honey. We help each other. Your mother and I helped you through college, supported you when you were starting your business, gave you a place to live until you were ready to be independent. We don't charge family members for family support." "That's true," I agreed. "But supporting someone through college or helping them get established isn't the same as expecting ongoing professional services for free. If I were a doctor, would you expect me to provide medical care for the family without compensation? If I were a lawyer, would you expect free legal services whenever someone needed them? That's different." "How is it different?" He paused, considering. "Well, cooking is something everyone does. It's not like being a doctor or a lawyer. Everyone cooks," I said. "Not everyone can cook a professional quality holiday meal for 12 people with dietary accommodations and perfect timing. That's a specialized skill that requires training, experience and significant time investment. The fact that it's food-related doesn't make it less valuable than other professional services." The conversation was more productive than the ones I'd had with my mother and Brooke. My father approached it like a problem to be solved rather than a personal attack to be defended against. He asked about my costs, my time investment, and the alternatives I'd researched. He wanted to understand the economics of what I was proposing. "So if we don't accept your estimate, you won't cook Christmas dinner?" "Correct. I'll attend as a guest, bring a side dish or dessert, and enjoy spending time with everyone without being responsible for the entire meal." "And you think Giuseppe's is the best alternative?" "Based on my research, their food is excellent, their prices are competitive, and they have experience with holiday catering. I'd be happy to help coordinate with them if that's what you decide." He promised to discuss it with my mother and get back to me by the weekend. I thanked him for listening and hung up feeling cautiously optimistic that at least one person in my family was capable of treating this as a practical problem, rather than a personal betrayal. Thursday brought unexpected validation from an unlikely source. I was working at the coffee shop near my apartment when I overheard a conversation at the next table between two women discussing their holiday plans. "I'm so relieved we're catering Christmas this year," one of them said. "Last year I spent 3 days cooking for 22 people, and I was so exhausted I barely enjoyed the actual dinner. "How much is catering costing you?" her friend asked. "1,500 for the full package, but it's worth every penny. They handle everything. Shopping, cooking, service, cleanup. All I have to do is enjoy my family." $1,500. For 22 people that worked out to about $68 per person. My estimate for 12 people at $800 worked out to $66 per person. I wasn't just being reasonable. I was actually undercharging compared to what other families were willing to pay for the same service. I finished my work and drove home with a clearer sense of perspective. This wasn't about being difficult or mercenary or ungrateful. This was about recognizing the actual value of skilled labor and expecting fair compensation for professional-level services. Other families understood this. Other families budgeted for holiday catering because they recognized that providing restaurant-quality meals for large groups required expertise that was worth paying for. Friday morning brought a text from my mother. "Can you come over for coffee? We'd like to discuss Christmas dinner." I arrived at the house prepared for anything. Acceptance of my estimate, rejection followed by alternative arrangements, or some kind of compromise proposal. What I found was my mother sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook full of calculations and what appeared to be printouts from several local catering websites. "I've been doing some research," she said without preamble. "You're right about the cost. Giuseppe's quoted me $920 for Christmas dinner for 12, and that doesn't include accommodations for dietary restrictions or any of the special touches you always add." I sat down across from her, impressed despite myself. "What did you think?" "I think your estimate is actually quite reasonable," she admitted. "But I also think there might be a middle ground here." She opened her notebook and showed me her calculation. She'd researched not just Giuseppe's but 4 other local catering services, comparing prices, menu options, and service packages. She'd also calculated what it would cost to buy all the ingredients for Christmas dinner and hire someone to cook and serve it, using local rates for private chef services. "Your $800 estimate is actually $200 less than the cheapest alternative I found," she said. "And the food you prepare is consistently better than anything we've had catered before." I waited, curious about where this was leading. "So here's what I'm thinking. What if we pay you the $800 for Christmas dinner, but we also make it a real business arrangement? You keep track of your time, we cover all ingredients and supplies, and we help with setup and cleanup so you're not handling everything alone." It was more than I'd expected and less than I'd hoped for, but it felt like genuine recognition of what I'd been providing. "What about help with the actual cooking?" "Well, that's the professional service we're paying for, isn't it? But we can certainly handle everything before and after so you can focus on the food preparation itself." I considered the proposal. It wasn't perfect, but it represented a fundamental shift in how my family understood and valued my contributions. Instead of free labor disguised as family obligation, it would be paid work with clear boundaries and shared responsibilities. "I think that could work," I said. "Can we put the details in writing so everyone understands what's included?" "Of course. I want this to be fair for everyone, especially you." We spent the next hour drafting a simple agreement that outlined my responsibilities, their responsibilities, the payment amount and schedule, and what would happen if plans changed or additional services were requested. It felt strange to be negotiating a contract with my mother for Christmas dinner, but it also felt honest in a way our previous arrangements never had. By the time I left that afternoon, I had a signed agreement for my first official paid catering job, a timeline for menu planning and preparation, and something I'd never had before: explicit recognition that my cooking skills were valuable enough to compensate fairly. The real test would come on Christmas Day, when the theoretical agreement met the practical reality of family dynamics and holiday expectations. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was approaching a family holiday as an equal participant rather than an unpaid servant. That evening, I called Giuseppe's Italian Kitchen to congratulate them on their professionalism and to ask about their experience with family holiday catering. The owner, David Rodriguez, answered the phone himself. "We get a lot of families around the holidays," he told me. "It's usually women who've been cooking for everyone for years and finally decide they want to enjoy the holidays instead of working through them. Smart women. Cooking for large groups is hard work and it deserves to be compensated fairly." Do you ever get pushback from families about the cost? He laughed. Sometimes. But usually when people see the actual work involved and the quality of what we provide, they understand the value. The families who appreciate good food and recognize skilled labor are the ones we want to work with anyway. What about family members who think cooking should be free because it's family? Those are usually the family members who've never been responsible for cooking the meals themselves. Once they try to coordinate a holiday dinner for 12 people with multiple dietary restrictions and perfect timing, they develop a lot more respect for what's involved. The conversation continued for another few minutes, and by the time I hung up I felt like I'd found an ally who understood exactly what I'd been dealing with. David Rodriguez had built a successful business around the same skills I'd been providing for free, and he'd learned to value his expertise appropriately. Saturday brought a call from Brooke. "So Mom told me about your Christmas catering contract," she said, and I couldn't tell from her tone whether she was amused or annoyed. $800 for Christmas dinner. That's substantial. It's actually quite reasonable compared to professional catering services. Mom did the research herself. I know. She showed me the numbers. I have to admit, I didn't realize how expensive catering was, or how much work you've been doing all these years. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from Brooke, and I decided to accept it in the spirit it was offered. It's not work when you enjoy it and feel appreciated. It becomes work when it's expected rather than valued. So this is about feeling appreciated. This is about recognizing that skilled labor has value whether it's performed by family members or strangers. The $800 isn't really about the money, it's about acknowledgement that what I provide is worth something. But don't you feel weird charging family for Christmas dinner? I felt weird providing free professional services for years, while everyone else treated it like a hobby I performed for my own amusement. I said, "This feels honest." She was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something? Are you angry with us? Is this punishment for something?" "I'm not angry," I said, and realized it was true. "I'm just clear about boundaries now. I understand the difference between family support and professional services, and I'm not willing to pretend they're the same thing anymore." "So what happens after Christmas? Are you going to charge for everything now?" "I'm going to charge for professional-level catering services. Birthday dinners, Sunday suppers, helping Dad with his computer, those are still just family things. But planning and executing holiday meals for 12 people with dietary accommodations and perfect timing, that's specialized work that deserves compensation." The conversation ended on a more positive note than our previous discussion. Brooke still seemed confused by my position, but she was making an effort to understand it rather than simply dismissing it as inappropriate or selfish. Sunday brought an unexpected development. Aunt Helen called to ask about Christmas plans, and my mother apparently explained the new arrangement. Instead of being scandalized by the idea of paying family members for holiday cooking, Helen was enthusiastic. "What a brilliant idea," she told me when she called later that day. "I've been thinking about hiring someone to handle Christmas dinner for years, but I never knew who to trust with something so important. The fact that you're willing to do it professionally makes perfect sense. You're not offended by the idea of paying family for Christmas dinner." "Honey, I'm offended by the idea of expecting family to provide professional services for free. Your mother told me what you've been doing all these years, and frankly we should have been compensating you properly from the beginning." It was validation I hadn't expected from that court. Helen had always been practical about money and fairness, but I'd assumed the family loyalty argument would resonate with her generation more than economic reasoning. "Actually," she continued, "I'd like to hire you for New Year's Eve if you're available. Nothing as elaborate as Christmas, just dinner for 8, but I'd rather pay you to do it right than stress about it myself." By Sunday evening, I had 2 paid catering jobs scheduled, and a completely different relationship with my family's holiday expectation. The shift from unpaid family obligation to compensated professional service had changed everything. Not just the practical arrangements, but the entire dynamic of how my contributions were understood and valued. For the first time in years I was looking forward to Christmas dinner. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of crisp December air that made everything feel possible. I woke up in my apartment at 7:30, made coffee in my small kitchen, and reviewed the timeline I'd prepared for the day's cooking. For the first time in my adult life, I was approaching a family holiday as a paid professional rather than a volunteer martyr, and the difference was remarkable. The menu I'd planned was ambitious but manageable: herb-crusted prime rib instead of turkey, truffle mashed potatoes, roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon, honey-glazed carrots, Yorkshire pudding, and a chocolate Yule log for dessert. I'd spent the previous week shopping for ingredients, preparing what could be made ahead, and coordinating timing so that everything would finish simultaneously without the last-minute chaos that had characterized previous holidays. At 8:15, I loaded my car with equipment and drove to my parents' house, where I found my father waiting in the kitchen with coffee and a genuine smile. "Good morning, Chef Claire," he said with the kind of formality that suggested he was taking this new arrangement seriously. "Your workspace is ready for inspection." He'd cleared every surface in the kitchen, organized the pantry according to the list I'd provided, and arranged all the serving dishes and utensils I'd requested. The dining room table was set with the good china and crystal, but without the scattered clutter of previous holidays. Everything looked intentional rather than harried. "This is perfect," I told him, genuinely impressed by the level of preparation he'd put into supporting my work. "Thank you for taking care of all this. Your mother is handling the flowers and final table arrangements. Brooke is coming early to help with anything you need. We want this to go smoothly for everyone, especially you." It was a small thing, but the acknowledgement that they wanted the day to go well for me specifically felt revolutionary. In previous years, my role had been to make sure the day went well for everyone else, regardless of what that cost me personally. The shift to being considered a participant whose experience mattered was subtle but transformative. I spent the morning working in a kitchen that felt different than it ever had before. Instead of chaos and last-minute accommodations, there was calm efficiency. Instead of interruptions and schedule changes, there was respect for the professional process I was managing. When my mother appeared to check on progress, she asked if there was anything I needed rather than offering suggestions for improvement. When Brooke arrived with James, she immediately asked how she could help rather than settling into a comfortable chair to provide moral support. The prime rib went into the oven at exactly the time I'd calculated. The Yorkshire pudding batter rested in the refrigerator, ready for its precisely timed preparation. The vegetables were prepped and waiting in covered dishes. Everything was proceeding according to plan, without drama or crisis, or the kind of frantic improvisation that had characterized previous holiday cooking experiences. At noon, James's parents arrived with the same formal courtesy they'd displayed at Thanksgiving, but this time their compliments felt different. When Patricia mentioned that the house smelled like a high-end restaurant, my mother responded by explaining that they'd hired professional catering services for Christmas dinner. "Claire has her own catering business now," she said with obvious pride. "We're her first official client." It wasn't technically true. I didn't have a catering business beyond this single contract. But hearing my mother describe my work as professional services rather than a family hobby felt like validation I'd been waiting years to receive. Patricia asked intelligent questions about menu planning and timing, treating me like the skilled professional I was, rather than the helpful family member I'd been classified as before. When Rachel arrived with her continuing dietary restrictions, she immediately apologized for not providing advance notice and offered to bring her own meal rather than expecting accommodation. I'd already planned alternatives that would work within her limitations, but her approach was completely different from the casual assumptions she'd made at Thanksgiving. She understood that my time and expertise had value, and she respected the professional boundaries I'd established. Lunch was served at exactly 1 o'clock, with every dish achieving the temperature and presentation I'd planned. The prime rib was perfectly medium rare with a crispy herb crust. The Yorkshire pudding was golden and properly risen. The vegetables retained their texture and flavor, without the overcooked mushiness that had resulted from Thanksgiving's extended delays. Everything looked and tasted like something that might be served at a fine restaurant. More importantly, I was able to sit down with everyone else and enjoy the meal I'd prepared. Because I'd been paid for my work and supported appropriately throughout the process, I didn't feel resentful or exhausted. I felt accomplished and appreciated, able to enjoy both the food and the company without the underlying tension that had characterized previous family gatherings. The conversation over dinner was different too. Instead of the casual dismissal of my contributions that had marked previous holidays, There was genuine appreciation for what I'd provided. James's father, who worked in business consulting, asked detailed questions about my cost calculations and timeline management. Patricia wanted to know about my training and experience, treating my cooking skills like the professional expertise they represented. Most surprisingly, my own family seemed to see me differently. My mother introduced topics that acknowledged my intelligence and capabilities beyond cooking. My father asked about my freelance design work with the kind of interest he'd never shown before. Brooke spoke to me like an equal rather than a helpful younger sister, engaging with my opinions on subjects beyond food preparation. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. By treating my cooking skills as professional services worth compensating, my family had inadvertently begun treating me as a professional worth respecting in other areas as well. The psychological transformation was as significant as the practical changes in how the holiday was organized. After dinner, the cleanup process reflected the new dynamic perfectly. I handled the professional kitchen cleanup, sanitizing surfaces, properly storing equipment, ensuring that everything was left in professional condition. My family handled everything else, clearing the table, washing serving dishes, organizing leftovers, restoring the dining room to its normal configuration. The division of labor was logical and fair, with everyone contributing according to their expertise and responsibility. By 4:30 I was packed up and ready to leave, with a check for $800 and an experience that had exceeded my expectations in every possible way. The professional arrangement hadn't diminished the family connection. It had enhanced it by removing the resentment and exploitation that had undermined previous gatherings. That was the best Christmas dinner we've ever had, my mother said as she walked me to my car. Not just the food, though that was incredible. The whole day felt more relaxed and enjoyable for everyone, including me, I said. That's what happens when everyone's role is clear and fairly compensated. I have to admit, I was worried that paying you would make it feel too businesslike, but it actually felt more like family because everyone was contributing appropriately. The insight was perceptive and encouraging. The professional arrangement hadn't created distance. It had created equity. When my contributions were valued appropriately, I was able to participate in the family gathering as an equal rather than a servant, which benefited everyone involved. That evening, I deposited the check and spent time reflecting on how dramatically the day had differed from previous holiday experiences. The financial compensation was significant, but the psychological impact was even more valuable. I felt respected, appreciated, and fairly treated in a way that had never characterized my relationship with family gatherings before. The success of Christmas dinner also clarified my thinking about future family interaction. I understood now that the problem had never been the cooking itself. I genuinely enjoyed creating special meals for people I cared about. The problem had been the exploitation and lack of appreciation that had surrounded that cooking. When my skills were valued appropriately and my boundaries were respected, providing professional catering services for family members felt fulfilling rather than burdensome. The week between Christmas and New Year's brought several unexpected developments. Word about my successful Christmas catering had apparently spread through my family's social network, because I received 3 inquiries about catering other events. Aunt Helen confirmed her New Year's Eve dinner request and asked about availability for her daughter's graduation party in the spring. A family friend who'd heard about Christmas dinner wanted to discuss catering for her husband's retirement celebration. More significantly, Brooke called to apologize for her initial reaction to my business proposal. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she said, "and I realize I was completely wrong about the charging family issue. After seeing how well Christmas went when everyone's contributions were valued appropriately, I understand what you were trying to accomplish." The apology was more substantive than I'd expected, and seemed genuinely motivated by understanding rather than family pressure. "What changed your mind?" "Honestly, James," he looked at your Christmas dinner contract from a business perspective and explained how undervalued your services had been all these years. He said any professional chef would charge twice what you're asking for that level of quality and service. James's validation felt particularly meaningful because it came from someone outside the family dynamics, someone who could evaluate my work objectively without the emotional complications that had clouded my family's perspective for years. He also pointed out that expecting family members to provide free professional services actually damages relationships rather than strengthening them. Brooke continued, "When people feel exploited, even by family, it creates resentment that undermines everything else." The insight was sophisticated and suggested that James understood relationship dynamics better than I'd given him credit for. His business background apparently included awareness of how economic fairness affected interpersonal connections, knowledge that had been notably absent from my family's approach to my contribution. "I'm more than okay with it. I'm proud of you for establishing appropriate boundaries and demanding fair treatment. I should have supported you from the beginning instead of making you feel guilty for recognizing the value of your own work." The conversation marked a turning point in my relationship with Brooke. For the first time in our adult lives, she was acknowledging my expertise and supporting my professional aspirations, rather than dismissing them as hobbies or personality quirks. The respect felt genuine and transformative. New Year's Eve dinner for Aunt Helen was even more successful than Christmas had been. Working in her smaller kitchen with a more intimate guest list allowed me to focus on fine details and presentation in ways that weren't possible with larger groups. The menu was elegant but manageable: beef tenderloin with red wine reduction, roasted vegetables, garlic mashed potatoes, and individual chocolate lava cakes for dessert. Helen's guests were effusive in their praise, and asked multiple times about my availability for their own event. By the end of the evening, I had business cards from 4 potential clients, and genuine confidence that I could build a sustainable catering business if I chose to pursue it seriously. The success also confirmed that my Christmas experience hadn't been a fluke. When my cooking was treated as professional service rather than family obligation, when I was compensated fairly and supported appropriately, I was capable of delivering restaurant-quality results consistently. The difference wasn't in my skills or effort. It was in the context and expectations surrounding my work. January brought a surprising phone call from David Rodriguez at Jobbay's Italian Kitchen. "I heard through the grapevine that you've started doing family catering," he said. "How's it going?" I explained the Christmas and New Year's experiences, the positive response from clients, and the inquiries I'd been receiving. He listened with the interest of someone who understood the challenges and opportunities involved in professional food service. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about expanding Jobbay's catering services, maybe partnering with local chefs who specialize in intimate family events. Would you be interested in discussing a collaboration?" The offer was unexpected and intriguing. Jobbay's had an established reputation and client base, professional kitchen facilities, and business systems that could support more extensive catering operations. Partnering with them could provide the infrastructure and credibility to build a legitimate catering business without the substantial startup costs and marketing challenges of going completely independent. What would that partnership look like? You'd handle the family and small event catering under the Jobbay's umbrella. We'd provide kitchen access, business support, and client referrals. You'd keep 70% of revenues after ingredient costs, and we'd handle the business administration and marketing. The financial terms were generous, and the support structure addressed most of the practical barriers to expanding my catering work. More importantly, the offer represented professional recognition from an established business owner who understood the value of what I was providing. "Can I think about it and get back to you?" "Of course. Take your time. The offer stands whenever you're ready to discuss it seriously." That evening, I sat in my small apartment, calculating what a partnership with Jobbay's might mean for my career and financial situation. Based on the pricing I'd established and the demand I'd already identified, part-time catering work could supplement my graphic design income significantly. Full-time catering work could potentially replace it entirely, providing both higher earnings and more creative satisfaction than my current freelance projects. The prospect was exciting but also intimidating. Building a catering business would require skills beyond cooking: client management, financial planning, marketing, logistics coordination. But the foundation was solid. I demonstrated that I could deliver professional quality results consistently, that there was demand for my services, and that I could establish appropriate boundaries and pricing, even with family clients. February brought validation from an unexpected source. Patricia, James's mother, called to inquire about catering her book club's annual luncheon. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about that Christmas dinner," she said. The food was exceptional, but what impressed me most was your professionalism. Everything was perfectly organized and executed. The compliment felt particularly meaningful coming from someone who clearly had high standards and extensive experience with professional services. Patricia moved in social circles where quality and reliability were expected rather than hoped for, and her willingness to hire me for her own event suggested that my work met those standards. I've worked with several catering companies over the years, she continued, and most of them treat small events as afterthoughts. They send junior staff, use standard menus, and provide adequate but unremarkable service. What you provided was completely different, personalized, creative, and executed at a level that most caterers reserve for their largest clients. The insight helped me understand what differentiated my approach from standard catering service. Because I was working directly with clients, rather than through a large company structure, I could provide the kind of individual attention and customization that was difficult for bigger operations to deliver consistently. The book club luncheon is 12 women, all of whom have very particular tastes and dietary preferences. I need someone who can accommodate individual requirements without making anyone feel like a burden or exception. Based on what I observed at Christmas, I think you're exactly the right person for this kind of event. Patricia's event was scheduled for March, giving me time to plan carefully and continue building my reputation with high-quality clients. The word-of-mouth referrals were already proving more valuable than any advertising I could have afforded, creating a client base of people who understood and appreciated professional service. The success of my family catering experiment had generated consequences that extended far beyond the original goal of fair compensation for holiday cooking. By establishing appropriate boundaries and demanding professional treatment for professional skills, I'd accidentally launched a legitimate business opportunity that could reshape my entire career trajectory. More importantly, the process had transformed my relationship with my family from exploitation disguised as tradition to genuine mutual respect and appreciation. My mother now introduced me as someone who ran her own catering business, rather than someone who enjoyed cooking as a hobby. My father consulted me on business decisions, recognizing expertise that he'd never acknowledged before. Brooke treated me as an equal whose opinions and achievements mattered. The psychological transformation was as significant as the practical change. I no longer felt like the family servant whose contributions were expected but not valued. I felt like a skilled professional whose services were sought after and appropriately compensated. The shift in self-perception had affected every aspect of my life, from confidence in client interactions to willingness to pursue challenging projects in my graphic design work. March arrived with Patricia's book club luncheon and my decision about David's partnership offer. The luncheon was intimate but complex, requiring 12 different menu accommodations for various dietary restrictions and preferences. I created individual menus for each guest, ensuring that everyone received a complete and satisfying meal that met their specific requirements. The event was flawless, every dish was perfectly prepared and beautifully presented. Every dietary restriction was accommodated without compromising flavor or presentation. Every guest received the kind of personalized attention that made them feel special rather than merely fed. The response was overwhelming. 3 of the 12 guests booked events before I'd finished cleaning up. 2 others requested my contact information for future occasions. Patricia asked about my availability for her daughter's wedding reception, a much larger and more prestigious event that could establish my reputation with an entirely new client base. That evening I called David Rodriguez and accepted his partnership offer. I want to build something bigger than family holiday catering, I told him. I want to create a business that provides the kind of personalized, high-quality service that most caterers can't or won't deliver. That's exactly what Giuseppe's needs, he said. Our reputation is built on quality and reliability, but we've never been able to compete effectively in the intimate event market because our business model is designed for larger functions. Your approach is perfect for filling that gap. The partnership agreement was finalized within 2 weeks. I would operate as Giuseppe's family events division, handling parties of 20 guests or fewer with the kind of customized service that had characterized my early catering experiences. Giuseppe's would provide kitchen access, business infrastructure and client referrals in exchange for 30% of revenues after cost. The financial arrangement was fair, but more importantly, the partnership provided legitimacy and resources that would have taken years to develop independently. Giuseppe's reputation opened doors that would have remained closed to an unknown individual caterer. Their business systems handled the administrative details that would have consumed time better spent on cooking and client service. By April, I was catering 2 events per week and building a waiting list of potential clients. The work was demanding but fulfilling in ways that my previous career had never been. Every event was an opportunity to create something beautiful and memorable for people who genuinely appreciated what I was providing. Every successful event generated referrals and recommendations that expanded my reputation and client base. More significantly, the business success had validated the decision to demand fair compensation for professional skill. The same expertise that my family had expected for free was now generating substantial income and professional recognition. The transformation from unpaid family obligation to legitimate business venture demonstrated that the problem had never been my capabilities. It had been the context that devalued those capabilities. The psychological impact extended beyond work satisfaction to every aspect of my life. Confidence gained through professional success influenced my personal relationships, my willingness to pursue challenging projects, and my ability to establish appropriate boundaries in all areas. The woman who had spent Thanksgiving night washing dishes alone, while smiling at the cosmic joke of her situation, had evolved into someone who commanded respect and compensation for her expertise. The partnership with Giuseppe's also provided opportunities for professional development that wouldn't have been available as an independent caterer. David encouraged me to experiment with new techniques and menu items, to attend culinary workshops and industry conferences, to build skills that would enhance the quality and creativity of my work. By the end of spring, Thompson Catering was booked solid through the summer with a diverse client base that ranged from intimate family celebrations to sophisticated corporate events. The business was profitable, growing and building a reputation for exactly the kind of personalized, high-quality service that I'd envisioned when I first demanded fair compensation for Christmas dinner. The success felt like justice, not revenge against my family for their previous exploitation, but vindication of my decision to value my own expertise appropriately. The skills that had been dismissed as hobbies when provided for free were now generating professional recognition and financial success when offered in an appropriate business context. Most importantly, the transformation had improved rather than damaged my family relationship. When my contributions were valued appropriately and my boundaries were respected, I was able to enjoy family gatherings as a participant, rather than a servant. The resentment and exploitation that had undermined previous holidays had been replaced by genuine appreciation and mutual respect. The woman who had started this journey by washing Thanksgiving dishes alone had discovered something more valuable than fair compensation for her cooking skill. She had learned to recognize and demand appropriate treatment for her expertise in all areas of her life, creating a foundation for both professional success and personal fulfillment that would have been impossible while she was providing free labor disguised as family obligation. The troubles started in late October, almost exactly 11 months after the Thanksgiving that had changed everything. My catering business was thriving beyond anything I'd imagined, booked solid through the holiday season, with events that ranged from intimate family dinners to elaborate corporate celebrations. The partnership with Giuseppe's had provided the platform for growth that would have taken years to achieve independently, and my reputation for personalized, high-quality service had spread throughout Riverside and the surrounding community. I was reviewing the weekend's events in my apartment when my phone rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with the comfortable familiarity that had characterized our relationship since Christmas had reset our family dynamics on a foundation of mutual respect and fair compensation. "Claire, sweetheart, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," she said, though her tone carried an undercurrent of urgency that suggested she'd be continuing regardless of my answer. "Just finishing up some client planning. What's going on?" "Well, I've been talking with your father about Thanksgiving this year, and we were hoping we could discuss arrangements with you. We know how busy you are now with your catering business, but we were wondering if you might be available for family dinner. The request was reasonable and respectfully phrased, acknowledging both my professional commitments and the need to plan ahead for holiday scheduling. It was exactly the kind of approach I'd hoped would become standard after the successful restructuring of our Christmas arrangement. Of course, I said, let me check my calendar and put together a proposal. Same group as last year, 12 people with dietary accommodation. There was a pause that lasted just long enough to make me wonder if the connection had dropped. Actually, honey, that's what I wanted to talk with you about. The guest list has grown a bit since last year. Brooke is bringing James, of course, and his parents and his sister with her husband and their 2 children. Uncle Jim is coming with his new girlfriend. Aunt Helen is bringing Rachel and her boyfriend, and cousin Michael is driving up from Cincinnati with his family. I grabbed a pen and started calculating. How many people total? 22, she said quickly, as if saying it faster would make it seem less overwhelming. But I know that sounds like a lot, and we completely understand if it's beyond what you can handle. We just thought we'd ask because your food is so much better than anything we could cater, and everyone has been talking about Christmas dinner all year. 22 people. Nearly double the size of previous family gatherings, requiring significantly more preparation time, additional equipment, expanded menu planning, and coordination that would push my capabilities to their absolute limits. It was the kind of event that professional catering companies would require weeks of advance planning and substantial deposits to execute properly. When were you hoping to schedule this? I asked, though I was already calculating what such an event would cost and whether I had the capacity to handle it during my busiest season. Well, that's the other thing. James's family can only do Thanksgiving Day itself because of their travel schedule. They're flying in Thursday morning and leaving Friday afternoon, so there's no flexibility on timing. Thanksgiving Day, the single most demanding day of the year for anyone in the food service industry, when every restaurant and caterer was operating at maximum capacity, and even basic scheduling required months of advance planning. The day when ingredient costs were highest, preparation time was most limited, and the margin for error was essentially non-existent. Mom, Thanksgiving Day catering for 22 people would be a major event. I'd need to block out the entire day, possibly the day before as well, for preparation. And the cost would be substantial. Oh, we understand that completely. Your father and I talked about it, and we're prepared to pay whatever's appropriate for professional catering. We just want to make sure we can have the family together for what might be Uncle Jim's last Thanksgiving. The emotional appeal was expertly deployed. Uncle Jim's health had been declining for several months, and the possibility that this could be his final holiday gathering added a layer of moral pressure that made it difficult to decline based purely on logistical consideration. But the professional side of my brain was already running calculations that painted a challenging picture. Let me put together a detailed proposal, I said. 22 people on Thanksgiving Day with dietary accommodations and full service would be a significant undertaking. I'll need to research availability and pricing before I can give you a definitive answer. Of course, sweetheart. We don't want to pressure you. We just thought we'd ask, because you're so talented and we trust you completely. After hanging up, I spent the evening researching what other catering companies charged for Thanksgiving Day events of this magnitude. The numbers were sobering. Giuseppe's Thanksgiving catering for 22 people started at $2,800, and that was for their standard menu without customizations or dietary accommodation. Other local caterers were charging similar rates, with some requiring deposits as much as 50% of the total cost to reserve Thanksgiving Day availability. The scope of what my mother was requesting went far beyond family catering into the realm of major event management. 22 people required rental equipment that I didn't own, preparation space that exceeded my parents' kitchen capacity, and timing coordination that would require military precision to execute successfully. It was the kind of event that established catering companies planned for months in advance with full professional teams. I calculated what I would need to charge to make the event financially viable while compensating myself fairly for the enormous amount of work involved. The number was higher than I'd ever quoted for any event, family or otherwise, but it reflected the actual cost of providing professional service for a major holiday gathering. The next morning, I called David Rodriguez to discuss the logistics and feasibility of handling such a large Thanksgiving event. 22 people on Thanksgiving Day, he whistled low. That's not family catering anymore, Claire. That's a major event that would require our full kitchen facilities and probably additional staff support. What would Giuseppe's charge for something like that? $3,200, minimum. Probably $35 if there are multiple dietary restrictions and custom menu items. And we'd require a 50% deposit by October 15th to hold the date. It's my family, I said. I can't charge them $3,500 for Thanksgiving dinner. Why not? If that's what the service costs, that's what you charge. Family doesn't mean you provide professional services at a loss. The conversation clarified my thinking about the proposal. This wasn't the kind of intimate family catering that had worked so well for Christmas and other smaller events. This was a major commercial undertaking that required professional pricing and infrastructure to execute properly. I spent the rest of the day creating a comprehensive proposal that outlined exactly what would be required to cater Thanksgiving dinner for 22 people. The menu planning alone would take days. The shopping would require multiple trips to specialty suppliers. The preparation would begin 2 days before Thanksgiving and continue through the morning of the event. The execution would require rental equipment, additional serving staff, and coordination that exceeded anything I'd attempted before. The final number was $2,800, which represented a significant family discount from what I could have charged outside clients for the same service. But even with the discount, it was more money than my family had ever paid for any single meal, and I knew the price would come as a shock regardless of how carefully I explained the reasoning behind it. That evening, I drove to my parents' house to present the proposal in person rather than trying to explain the complexities over the phone. I found them in the living room with detailed guest lists spread across the coffee table, planning seating arrangements and menu preferences, with the kind of enthusiastic energy that suggested they'd already committed to the event in their mind. "Claire, perfect timing," my father said as I entered. "We've been working out all the details for Thanksgiving. Your mother has been so excited about this since we talked yesterday." I sat down with the folder containing my proposal, aware that what I was about to present would significantly complicate their planning process. "I've put together a comprehensive estimate for catering Thanksgiving dinner for 22 people. It's quite detailed because the scope of what you're requesting is substantially larger than anything I've done before." My mother looked up from the guest list with bright anticipation. "How exciting! We can't wait to see what you've planned." I opened the folder and began walking them through the proposal systematically. Menu options for 22 people, including accommodations for the dietary restrictions I'd identified based on the guest list, equipment rental requirements for serving and presentation, timeline for preparation and execution, including the staff support that would be necessary for an event of this magnitude, and finally the cost breakdown that justified the $2,800 total. The enthusiasm drained from my mother's face as I explained each component of the pricing. My father listened with increasing concern, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific costs or requirements. By the time I finished the presentation, the mood in the room had shifted from excitement to something approaching disbelief. $2,800, my mother repeated slowly, for Thanksgiving dinner. For professional catering services for 22 people on the busiest day of the year for the food service industry, I corrected. "This isn't family dinner anymore, Mom. This is a major event that would challenge any catering company." "But it's still family," she said, as if that fact should somehow reduce the complexity and cost of feeding 22 people a restaurant-quality meal on Thanksgiving Day. My father was reviewing the cost breakdown with the careful attention he brought to any significant financial decision. "I can see how you arrived at these numbers," he said slowly. "The scope is certainly much larger than what we've done before, but this is a substantial expense for a family dinner. It's a substantial expense because it's not really a family dinner. 22 people requires the same level of planning and execution as a commercial event. The only difference is that you're family, which is why I'm offering a significant discount from what I'd charge any other client." The conversation continued for another hour, with my parents asking detailed questions about every aspect of the proposal. Could the menu be simplified to reduce costs? Could family members contribute dishes to reduce the scope of my catering responsibility? Could the event be moved to a different day when ingredients and preparation would be less expensive? Each suggestion reflected their struggle to reconcile the reality of what they were requesting with their expectations about family obligations and costs. They wanted the professional quality and comprehensive service that I'd provided for Christmas, but they were having difficulty accepting that scaling up to 22 people fundamentally changed the nature of the undertaking. "Let us think about this," my father finally said. $2,800 is a significant expense, and we need to consider whether it's the best use of our holiday budget. "Of course," I said, "but I should mention that if you decide to move forward, I'd need a deposit within the next 2 weeks to hold Thanksgiving Day availability. This is my busiest season, and I'm already turning down other events to keep the day open for consideration." The timeline pressure was real but also strategic. I'd learned from my business experience that clients who were genuinely committed to an event would prioritize securing their date, while clients who were reluctant about the cost would often delay decisions indefinitely. The deposit requirement would clarify how seriously my family was considering the proposal. I left the folder with them and drove home feeling uncertain about how the situation would resolve. Part of me hoped they'd accept the proposal and allow me to create something truly spectacular for what could be Uncle Jim's final Thanksgiving. But another part of me was concerned about the family dynamics that would inevitably arise around such a substantial expense, regardless of how fairly it reflected the actual value of the services involved. The next morning brought a call from Brooke that clarified where at least part of the family stood on the proposal. "Claire, Mom told me about your Thanksgiving catering estimate. $2,800? Are you serious?" "Completely serious. That's actually below market rate for professional Thanksgiving catering for 22 people. But it's family. You can't charge family commercial rates for a holiday dinner." The argument was predictable but frustrating. "Brooke, this isn't a holiday dinner anymore. It's a major catering event that happens to involve family members. The amount of work, the complexity of coordination, the cost of ingredients, none of that changes because we're related. So what happened to family loyalty? What happened to doing things for each other because we care?" "Family loyalty works both ways," I said. "It means respecting each other's time and expertise, not expecting free professional services just because we share DNA." The conversation devolved into familiar territory, with Brooke arguing that I was being mercenary and me explaining that expecting $2,800 worth of free labor was the actual mercenary position. We ended the call without resolution, but I could sense that the family consensus was moving against accepting my proposal. That afternoon, my mother called with a counter-proposal that confirmed my suspicion. "Your father and I have been talking, and we understand that 22 people is a lot of work, but we were wondering if there might be a middle ground. What if family members contributed dishes to reduce your workload? What if we simplified the menu to bring down the cost? What if we moved the event to Saturday instead of Thursday?" Each suggestion represented a fundamental misunderstanding of how professional catering worked. Contributing dishes from non-professional kitchens would compromise food safety and presentation standards. Simplifying the menu wouldn't significantly reduce preparation time or coordination complexity. Moving the event to Saturday would conflict with other clients who'd already booked my services for the weekend. "Mom, I appreciate that you're trying to find alternatives, but what you're describing isn't professional catering anymore. It's a potluck dinner with some professional elements, which creates liability and quality control issues that I can't accept as a business owner. So you won't consider any modifications to the proposal?" "I'd be happy to discuss modifications within the framework of professional catering services. If you want to reduce the guest list to a manageable size, or if you want to schedule the event for a different day when I have more flexibility, we can certainly explore those options, but we've already invited everyone. Uncle Jim is specifically planning to be here, and James's parents have arranged their travel around Thanksgiving Day." The conversation revealed the core problem. My family had committed to an event without understanding its scope or cost, and now they were trying to force the reality of professional catering to conform to their expectations, rather than adjusting their plans to match what was actually feasible. I understand that creates difficulties, I said, but I can't provide professional services at prices that don't reflect their actual value. If $2,800 is beyond your budget, then you'll need to consider alternative arrangements. Like what? Giuseppe's offers excellent Thanksgiving catering. There are several other local companies that specialize in holiday events. Or you could scale back the guest list to something more manageable for family-style cooking. The suggestion that they hire outside catering seemed to surprise her, as if the possibility that I might not be available at any price hadn't occurred to her. But we want you to do it. Everyone has been looking forward to your cooking specific. Then everyone needs to understand that my cooking comes with professional standards and professional pricing. I'm not a hobby chef anymore, Mom. I'm a business owner with responsibilities to my clients and my reputation. The conversation ended with my mother promising to discuss the situation with my father and get back to me within a few days, but I could tell from her tone that the $2,800 price tag had effectively ended their consideration of my services, regardless of how fairly it reflected the actual cost of what they were requesting. That evening, I called David Rodriguez to update him on the situation and discuss alternative booking opportunities for Thanksgiving Day. Sounds like they want champagne service at beer prices, he said after I explained the family's response to my proposal. It's a common problem with family clients. They see the personal relationship and forget that it's still a business transaction. The frustrating part is that they understand the value when it comes to other professional services. They wouldn't expect their accountant to do their taxes for free, or their lawyer to handle legal work without compensation, but somehow cooking is different because it's traditionally been women's unpaid labor. That's exactly right. Food service gets devalued because it's associated with domestic work rather than professional expertise, but feeding 22 people on Thanksgiving Day requires the same level of skill and coordination as any other complex project. The conversation helped clarify my thinking about the broader implications of my family's response. This wasn't just about Thanksgiving dinner, it was about whether they truly understood and respected the professional transformation I'd undergone over the past year, or whether they still saw my catering business as an elaborate hobby that should be available for family use at family prices. 2 days later, my father called with their final decision. Claire, we've decided to go with Giuseppe's for Thanksgiving catering. We appreciate your proposal, but the cost is just beyond what we're comfortable spending for a family dinner. The decision wasn't surprising, but the way he framed it was revealing. They were still thinking of this as a family dinner rather than a major catering event, which explained why they couldn't reconcile the professional pricing with their expectations. I understand, I said. Giuseppe's will do an excellent job for you. We were hoping you might still be able to join us as a family member, of course. We know Thanksgiving Day is busy for you professionally, but we'd love to have you there if possible. The invitation was well-intentioned, but problematic. Attending as a guest would mean watching Giuseppe's staff provide the same services I'd offered for the same price. While my family pretended that their decision had been based on practical considerations, rather than their unwillingness to pay professional rates for professional services from a family member. Let me check my schedule and get back to you. Thanksgiving Day is typically very busy for catering work. After hanging up, I realized that my family's decision had revealed something important about the limits of the respect and recognition I'd achieved over the past year. While they were willing to pay professional rates for Christmas dinner and other smaller events, they balked at treating large-scale holiday catering as legitimate business rather than extended family obligation. The double standard was subtle but significant. Giuseppe's was a real business that deserved professional compensation. Claire Thompson Catering was a family member's side project that should be available at family prices regardless of the scope or complexity involved. That afternoon, I called Giuseppe's to confirm that they could accommodate my family's event, and to offer my assistance with any questions about dietary restrictions or family preference. David assured me that they'd provide excellent service, and asked if I wanted to work the event as part of their catering team. You could see firsthand how we handle large Thanksgiving events, he said. And it might be interesting for your family to see you working in a professional capacity rather than as a family member. The suggestion was intriguing. Working the event would allow me to maintain my professional commitments, while observing how my family interacted with catering staff, who weren't related to them. It would also demonstrate that my Thanksgiving Day availability wasn't unlimited. If I wasn't catering their event, I was working somewhere else rather than sitting at home waiting for their invitation. I'd be interested in that, I said. It would be educational to see your large event operations from the inside. The arrangement was finalized within a few days. I would work as part of Giuseppe's catering team for my family's Thanksgiving dinner, providing professional service alongside their regular staff, while maintaining the boundaries that my family had been unwilling to respect when hiring me directly. The irony was perfect. They'd chosen Giuseppe's over my services because they wanted professional catering at a price they considered reasonable. Now they'd receive professional catering that included my expertise, but delivered within a framework that didn't require them to acknowledge the value of my contributions as a family member. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my mother called to confirm the details with Giuseppe's and mentioned that they'd been assigned an experienced catering team that came highly recommended. "I just hope the food will be as good as what you would have made," she said with a wistfulness that suggested some regret about their decision. "Giuseppe's has an excellent reputation," I assured her. "I'm sure you'll be very happy with their service." I didn't mention that I'd be part of the team providing that service. That revelation would come on Thanksgiving Day itself, when my family would finally see me working in my professional capacity within a framework that respected and compensated my expertise appropriately. The stage was set for a Thanksgiving that would test everything I'd learned about professional boundaries, family dynamics, and the real meaning of respect and recognition in both personal and business relationships. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and crisp, with the kind of November weather that made kitchens feel like sanctuaries and food smell like home. I woke at 5:30 and drove through empty streets to Giuseppe's, where the prep team was already deep into the controlled chaos of holiday catering. 23 events scheduled across the county, each one requiring precise timing and flawless execution. David Rodriguez met me in the kitchen, clipboard in hand, and the focused energy of someone orchestrating a complex operation. "Your family's event is scheduled for 1 o'clock service," he said, reviewing the day's timeline. 22 guests, full traditional menu with dietary accommodations. Maria will be lead server and you'll work alongside her handling presentation and client interaction. I tied on my professional apron, the crisp white fabric bearing Giuseppe's logo in elegant script, and reviewed the menu we'd prepared for my family's gathering. Everything I would have provided if they'd accepted my proposal, but executed within Giuseppe's professional framework and compensated at rates they considered reasonable when paying an outside business. The morning passed in the rhythm of professional food service, precise knife work, careful seasoning, constant temperature monitoring, and the kind of systematic efficiency that transforms raw ingredients into memorable meals. Working alongside Giuseppe's experienced team reminded me how much I'd learned over the past year, how far I'd evolved from the amateur family cook who'd spent last Thanksgiving washing dishes alone. At 11:30, we loaded the catering van with everything needed for my family's dinner: heated serving containers, portable warming units, professional-grade serving utensils, and enough backup supplies to handle any emergency that might arise. The level of preparation and redundancy was something I could never have achieved working alone, regardless of how skilled I'd become. The drive to my parents' house felt surreal. I'd made this journey hundreds of times as a daughter, dozens of times as a struggling family member, and several times as a paid professional caterer. Today I was returning as an employee of the business my family had chosen over my services, about to provide the same expertise they'd been unwilling to compensate fairly when hiring me directly. We arrived at 12:15 to find the house transformed for entertaining. My mother had decorated with autumn flowers and elegant table settings, creating the kind of sophisticated atmosphere that suggested significant investment in making the event memorable. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd spared no expense on presentation while balking at professional rates for the food that would make or break the gathering. Maria introduced herself to my parents with the polished courtesy that characterized Giuseppe's client interaction. Professional but warm, knowledgeable but deferential, treating them as valued customers whose satisfaction was the primary goal. I worked quietly in the background, setting up serving stations and organizing equipment with the efficiency that came from months of experience. Claire, my mother appeared in the kitchen doorway, confusion evident on her face. "What are you doing here?" "I work for Giuseppe's now," I said simply, continuing to arrange serving utensils according to the systematic layout that ensured smooth service. "I'm part of your catering team today." The explanation was accurate but incomplete. I did work for Giuseppe's, but as a partner rather than an employee. The distinction felt important but unnecessary to explain in the moment. What mattered was that I was here in a professional capacity, providing the expertise they'd wanted at rates they considered appropriate. But I thought, "I mean, we invited you as family. I had professional commitments today," I said, "but this works out well for everyone. You get the professional service you wanted, and I get to see you all while fulfilling my work obligations." My father appeared behind her, taking in the scene with the careful attention he brought to unexpected developments. "So you're working the event?" "That's right. Giuseppe's catering team, professional service, everything you requested when you hired them." The conversation was interrupted by Maria calling for assistance with the final setup preparation. I excused myself and returned to work, aware that my parents were processing the implications of my presence in ways I couldn't predict or control. The guests began arriving at 12:45, and I watched through the kitchen window as my extended family gathered in the living room. Uncle Jim looked frail but determined, clearly making an effort to be present for what everyone understood might be his final Thanksgiving. James's parents arrived with the same formal courtesy they'd displayed at previous gatherings, though they seemed surprised by the professional catering set. Brooke and James were the last to arrive, and I could hear her voice carrying from the entryway as she greeted our parents. "Where's Claire? I thought she was coming as family today." "She's here," my mother said in a tone I couldn't quite interpret. "She's working." "Work? What do you mean working?" The conversation continued in the living room while I focused on the final service preparation. The turkey was perfectly golden, the sides were holding at optimal temperature, and everything was ready for the seamless presentation that would make this meal memorable for all the right reasons. At exactly 1 o'clock, Maria signaled the beginning of service. We moved through the house with professional efficiency, presenting each dish with the kind of detailed explanation that educated guests about what they were experiencing. The herb-crusted turkey with traditional sage stuffing, the truffle mashed potatoes with roasted garlic, the maple-glazed Brussels sprouts with pancetta, the honey bourbon glazed carrots, everything executed to Giuseppe's exacting standards and presented with the pride that came from genuine expertise. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Uncle Jim complimented the seasoning with the authority of someone who'd eaten countless holiday meals. James's mother praised the presentation, comparing it favorably to catering she'd experienced at high-end events. Even Rachel, with her continuing dietary restrictions, expressed genuine appreciation for the accommodations that allowed her to enjoy a complete meal without compromise. But it was Brooke's reaction that proved most revealing. She watched me work with growing amazement, clearly seeing me in a professional context for the first time. The systematic efficiency, the technical expertise, the seamless coordination with Maria, all of it demonstrated capabilities that she'd never fully understood when I was providing similar services as a family member. "Claire," she said as I refilled the serving dish of stuffing, "I had no idea you could do all this." "This is what I do," I said simply. "This is my profession. But it's so professional, like restaurant-level professional." The observation was accurate but seemed to surprise her. The same skills I'd been using for family events were suddenly more impressive when delivered within Giuseppe's framework, as if the business context somehow validated expertise that had been invisible when provided for free. James's father struck up a conversation about the complexity of coordinating such events, treating me as the skilled professional I was rather than the helpful family member I'd been classified as previously. His questions were intelligent and informed, demonstrating the kind of respect for expertise that my own family had been reluctant to show. "This level of service must require significant training and experience," he said, sampling the cranberry sauce with obvious appreciation. Several years of development, I agreed. Professional food service requires mastery of timing, coordination, presentation, and accommodation for various dietary needs. It's quite complex when done properly. And expensive, I'd imagine. This kind of quality probably costs significantly more than basic catering. Maria fielded the cost question with Giuseppe's standard diplomatic response about value and service quality. But I could see my parents processing the implication. They were paying Giuseppe's professional rates for the same expertise they'd been unwilling to compensate when hiring me directly. The meal proceeded flawlessly, with each course timed perfectly, and presented beautifully. The conversation was animated and appreciative, with multiple guests commenting on the exceptional quality of both food and service. It was exactly the kind of memorable family gathering my parents had envisioned when they'd planned this expanded celebration. But beneath the surface success, I could sense growing tension as various family members processed the situation. They were enjoying professional catering that included my expertise, provided at rates they considered reasonable, but delivered within a framework that highlighted the disconnect between their treatment of my services as a family member versus their respect for identical services from an outside business. The revelation came during dessert service, when James's mother asked Maria about Giuseppe's catering team and specifically about my background and training. "Claire is actually one of our most talented caterers," Maria said with genuine pride. "She specializes in intimate family events and has developed quite a reputation for personalized service and accommodation of complex dietary needs." "How interesting," Patricia said, turning to my parents. "So you hired Giuseppe specifically to get Claire's expertise?" The question hung in the air like smoke, carrying implications that everyone could sense but no one wanted to address directly. My parents exchanged glances that suggested they were processing connections they hadn't fully considered before. "We hired Giuseppe's because we wanted professional catering," my mother said carefully. "We didn't realize Claire would be part of the team. But surely you knew she worked for them. I mean, this is quite a coincidence otherwise." David Rodriguez chose that moment to arrive for his routine client check-in, a practice that demonstrated Giuseppe's commitment to service quality for major events. He moved through the room with the confident authority of someone who'd built a successful business on reputation and reliability. "How is everything going today?" he asked my parents with genuine interest. "Maria tells me the service has been flawless, which is exactly what we expect for events of this caliber. Everything has been wonderful," my father said. "The food is exceptional, and the service has been very professional." "Excellent. Claire is one of our most skilled caterers, so I'm not surprised. She has a gift for this kind of intimate family service." The casual mention of my role in their satisfaction created another moment of uncomfortable realization. They'd specifically chosen Giuseppe's over my services, but they were receiving my expertise anyway, just filtered through a business framework that commanded the respect they'd been unwilling to provide direct. James, who'd been observing the dynamics with the analytical skills that made him successful in business, finally addressed the elephant in the room. "So let me understand this correctly," he said with the directness that characterized his professional approach to complex situations. "You chose Giuseppe's over Claire's catering services, but Giuseppe's uses Claire as their specialist for exactly the kind of event you hired them to handle." "Claire works with Giuseppe's, yes," my mother said, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "At what rate?" James continued. "I mean, if Claire is providing the specialized expertise that makes this meal exceptional, what percentage of your payment to Giuseppe's actually goes to compensating her work?" David Rodriguez fielded the question with professional discretion, but his answer clarified the economics in ways that made my family's decision look increasingly problematic. "Our caterers receive fair compensation for their expertise, typically 70% of event revenues after cost." James was skilled enough with numbers to calculate the implications immediately. "So Claire receives roughly $2,000 for her work on this event, while Giuseppe's keeps $800 for business overhead and coordination." "That's approximately correct for events of this scope," David confirmed. The calculation hung in the air while everyone processed what it meant. My family was paying Giuseppe's $2,800 for catering that was primarily my work, with Giuseppe's keeping a $1,000 management fee for providing the business framework they'd demand. They could have hired me directly for the same price and kept the management fee in the family, but they'd chosen to pay outside overhead rather than compensate a family member at professional rate. Uncle Jim, who'd been quietly enjoying his meal while observing the conversation, finally spoke with the clarity that sometimes comes with age and illness. "So you paid a stranger to hire your daughter to cook your dinner because you didn't want to pay your daughter directly?" The question distilled the situation to its essential absurdity. They'd wanted professional catering at professional rates, but only when those rates were paid to a business rather than a family member. They'd been willing to compensate my expertise appropriately, but only when that compensation was filtered through an outside entity that commanded the respect they'd been unwilling to provide directly. "It's not that simple," my mother protested, but her explanation was interrupted by Brooke's sudden understanding of the broader implications. "Oh my God," she said, staring at me with dawning comprehension. "This is why you started charging for family catering. This is exactly why." The conversation that followed was unlike any family discussion we'd ever had. James explained the business principles that made my pricing strategies reasonable and necessary. Patricia compared the situation to her own professional experiences with family members who expected free legal services. David Rodriguez provided perspective on how successful food service businesses valued expertise and managed client relationships. But it was Uncle Jim who delivered the most pointed observation about the dynamics at play. "You know what this reminds me of?" he said, setting down his coffee cup with the deliberate care of someone making an important. "When I was young, there was a woman in our neighborhood who was the best seamstress in town. Everyone wanted her to make their special occasion clothes, but when her own family needed formal wear, they'd argue about her prices and try to get family discounts, even though they knew her work was worth every penny. Eventually she started telling family members that she was too busy to take their work, but she'd recommend other seamstresses who charged the same rates she did." He paused, looking around the table with the shrewd awareness that had made him successful in business for 40 years. The family members always paid those other seamstresses without complaint, because paying outsiders for professional services felt normal while paying family members felt like being taken advantage of. But the family member who was actually being taken advantage of was the seamstress, who was expected to provide skilled labor for free, just because she was related to the customers. The parallel was exact and devastating. My family had proven that they valued professional catering enough to pay market rates for it, but only when those rates were paid to a business rather than a family member. They'd been willing to compensate my expertise fairly, but only when that compensation was mediated by an outside entity that provided the psychological distance necessary for them to respect the transaction. The remainder of the afternoon passed in contemplative conversation, with various family members processing the implications of what had been revealed. Some, like James and his parents, seemed to understand immediately why I'd established professional boundaries and price. Others, particularly my parents, struggled with the cognitive dissonance between their treatment of my services as a family member versus their respect for identical services from Giuseppe's. But the most significant moment came as we were finishing the cleanup and preparing to depart. My mother approached me in the kitchen where I was packing equipment with the systematic efficiency that characterized professional catering operations. "Claire, I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Watching you work today, seeing the level of expertise and professionalism you bring to this, I finally understand what you were trying to tell us about valuing your work appropriately." The apology was more substantive than I'd expected, and seemed genuinely motivated by understanding rather than guilt. "What changed your mind?" "Seeing you in this context. Watching other people recognize and respect your expertise in ways that we hadn't been doing. Realizing that we were willing to pay professional rates for professional service, but only when we didn't have to acknowledge that our own daughter was the one providing that service." The insight was perceptive and encouraging. "So, what does that mean going forward?" "It means that when we want professional catering services, will hire you directly at your professional rates rather than paying someone else to hire you for us. It means treating your expertise with the same respect we'd show any other professional whose services we value. The conversation continued for another few minutes, touching on family dynamics, professional boundaries, and the importance of recognizing expertise regardless of personal relationships. By the time we finished talking, I felt like we'd reached a genuine understanding that would reshape our interactions going forward. David Rodriguez appeared as I was loading the last of the equipment into the catering van. "How did that go for you personally?" he asked with the kind of concern that suggested he understood the complexity of working family events in a professional capacity. "Better than I expected," I said. "I think some important realizations happened today." "Good. You know, this kind of situation comes up more often than you'd think. Family members who are skilled professionals often have to work within outside business frameworks before their own families recognize and respect their expertise. Why do you think that is?" "Familiarity. It's hard to see someone you've known since childhood as a skilled professional rather than just someone who's good at something. But when that same expertise is delivered through a business framework, it suddenly becomes impressive and worth paying for." The observation helped me understand the broader psychological patterns that had shaped my family's response to my professional development. It wasn't personal rejection of my capabilities, it was cognitive difficulty in recognizing expertise from someone they'd always known in a different context. As we drove away from my parents' house, I reflected on how dramatically this Thanksgiving had differed from the previous year's experience. Instead of washing dishes alone while smiling at cosmic jokes, I was finishing a successful professional event that had generated both income and family understanding. Instead of feeling exploited and unappreciated, I felt validated and respected for my expertise. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been accomplished through confrontation or demand. It had developed gradually through consistent professional behavior, appropriate boundary setting, and the kind of systematic demonstration of value that eventually becomes impossible to ignore or dismiss. Most importantly, the day had proven that my decision to demand fair compensation for professional services had been correct not just financially, but psychologically and relationally as well. When my family was forced to pay professional rates for professional service, they developed genuine appreciation for what I provided. When they had to choose between my expertise and alternatives, they recognized the superior quality of what I offered. When they saw me working in a respected professional context, they finally understood the skill level that had been invisible when I was providing similar services for free. The evening ended with text messages from various family members, thanking me for my work and expressing newfound appreciation for my expertise. Uncle Jim wrote that it had been the best Thanksgiving dinner he'd had in years, and he was grateful that his final family holiday had been so memorable. James sent a detailed message about business principles and professional respect that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the dynamics that had played out during the day. But it was Brooke's message that felt most significant. "I'm sorry it took so long for us to see you the way other people see you. You're incredibly talented, and you deserve to be treated like the professional you are." 6 months later, Claire Thompson Catering was operating at full capacity with a waiting list of clients who appreciated both the quality of my work and the value of paying professional rates for professional service. The partnership with Giuseppe's had evolved into a successful business relationship that provided the infrastructure and credibility to handle increasingly sophisticated events. More importantly, my family relationships had stabilized around mutual respect and appropriate boundary. When they wanted professional catering services, they hired me at my professional rates and treated the transaction with the same respect they'd show any valued service provider. When we gathered for family occasions that didn't require professional catering, I participated as a family member without the expectation that I'd provide free professional labor. The transformation hadn't eliminated all family complications, but it had established a foundation of fairness and recognition that made our relationships more honest and sustainable. I was no longer the family member who provided unlimited free services in exchange for conditional acceptance. I was a skilled professional whose expertise was valued appropriately, whether the client was family or stranger, and on quiet evenings in my apartment, reviewing the successful events and satisfied clients that had grown from that first decision to demand fair compensation for Christmas dinner. I sometimes thought about the woman who'd spent Thanksgiving night washing dishes alone while smiling at her own exploitation. She'd discovered something more valuable than fair payment for her cooking skill. She'd learned to recognize and demand appropriate treatment for her expertise in all areas of her life, creating a foundation for both professional success and personal fulfillment that would have been impossible while she was providing free labor disguised as family obligation. The revolution had started with a smile over dirty dishes, and ended with a business built on respect, recognition, and the simple principle that expertise has value regardless of who provides it or who receives it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.